We will have 3 panels focused on health, community, and legal issues associated with aviation noise and pollution. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Arlene Bransaft, who is the honorary chair of our Quiet American Skies program.
It's been over 45 years since I did my study on the effects of noise on children's learning when their classrooms were adjacent to the elevated train tracks. And by the 6th grade, they were nearly a year behind in reading. What was really important about that study is how quickly the New York City Transit Authority and the Board of Education abated the noise at the school so that I could go back the following year and learn that children now on the side adjacent to the tracks were reading at the same level as the children on the quiet side. It's now 45 years later, we have far more research linking noise to adverse mental and physical health effects. And I'm looking forward to the speakers today who will address the scientific link between noise and adverse health. And then we will hear from the voices of the people who are suffering from the overhead flights. And to me, their voices equal that of the research, because over the past 45 years, I have listened to many, many people talk about how much they're suffering. And as a psychologist, suffering is a key word. And then what do we do about it? I do believe in legal action. And I'm looking forward to the 3rd group of speakers who will address the issue of what we can do legally, because we may have to pursue it legally in order to quiet the skies and bring everyone a healthier, quieter environment. Thank you.
First, people affected by aviation noise are experiencing loud, penetrating, repetitive noise at low altitude, and this is happening during the night as well as during the day. Second, people's health is being affected by sleep disruption, emotional distress, and physical manifestations. The point is that this is a serious health problem, a national public health problem. It's something we knew 50 years ago. However, many people, including policymakers, are not aware of the insidious effects of noise as well as pollution. Referring to aviation noise as an annoyance and using inadequate metrics trivialize the problem and will not bring us to any meaningful solutions. This conference is about connecting the dots to understand and gain clarity on the problem so that we can adequately address it. And we also need effective federal noise legislation to help us. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. She is the co-chair of the Congressional Quiet Skies Caucus, a national leader and a woman of many accomplishments in civil rights, women's rights, and other areas. Her leadership on aviation impacts is helping to bring this clarity that we need. Congresswoman?
I hear from DC residents almost daily about the negative impact aviation noise has on their quality of life and health. This Congress, I have introduced 3 bills, 3, to combat helicopter noise in DC and have co-sponsored 9 bills to combat aviation noise nationally. I'm running for chair or ranking member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure next Congress. If I am chair of the committee next Congress, combating aviation noise will be a top priority in the aviation reauthorization bill. I look forward to continue to work with quiet communities to reduce aviation noise and create quieter skies. Thank you very much.
So our first panel today is comprised of some of the top researchers and clinicians who are concerned with aviation noise and pollution in general. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Nilakshi Huda from Tufts University. Dr. Huda has done pioneering work to advance our understanding of community and health impacts from aviation pollution.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'll talk briefly about the impact of aviation emissions on air quality and associated health effects in near airport communities today. So when we conducted measurements of ultrafine particles at LAX or near LAX or even farther away from LAX, this is what we found. This is a map of ultrafine particle concentrations, wherein the higher concentrations are shown in darker colors and lighter colors represent low concentrations. You'll see that the pattern is such that the highest concentrations are found underneath landing jet trajectories, aligning with the downwind direction. The wind at LAX blows from west-southwest. The higher concentrations can be 10-fold higher compared to the clean background near LAX, but even around 12 miles away, they were 3 or 4-fold higher than the urban background. Hence, the key finding that I was going to expound on, the adverse impacts of aviation emissions on air quality extend over areas that encompass large populations, and they extend over large areas near big airports. Adverse health conditions are prevalent at higher incident rates in near airport communities. This has been shown for a range of health impacts. The one that I want to focus on today are preterm birth and brain cancer. For mothers that were living within 15 kilometers of LAX, and we assign those exposures for a large data set, about 175,000 mothers or pregnant people between 2008 to 2016, to understand whether or not exposure to higher ultrafine concentrations, specifically of aircraft origin, had any effect on preterm births. And we found that preterm birth rates among mothers exposed to ultrafine particles from jet exhaust were actually higher, about a 32% higher chance for those that were exposed to the highest levels of pollution compared to the lowest levels of pollution near LAX. Similar models were then used to study exposure for a multi-ethnic cohort near LAX or around the LAX in Los Angeles region, and we found an association between airport-related ultrafine particles and a risk of malignant brain cancer. About a 12% increase in risk per interquartile range of exposure. So if you divide the entire subject here in 4 bins, so as you jump from one bin to the other, you go one up in interquartile range, there's a 12% increase in risk. We found that if you did this analysis, stratify that by race, for the African American subgroup that had the highest exposure, the malignant brain cancer risk was actually 30% higher for each interquartile range.
Thank you, Nilakshi. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Matthias Basner. Dr. Basner is Associate Professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Perelman School of Medicine. He's a leading researcher on the effects of transportation noise on sleep and health, and an advisor to the World Health Organization.
So I've been doing research on the effects of noise on sleep and health for more than 20 years. So obviously sleep is extremely important for maintaining both physical and mental health. And here on this slide, you see all the negative things that can happen if we're not getting sufficient sleep on a chronic basis. And the red ones are like the psychological or mental health issues that one can develop. The blue ones are the physiological effects we see after sleep that is too short or disturbed, and the black ones are long-term health consequences down the road that have been associated with not getting sufficient sleep. And it's really important to mention that there's 2 components to sleep. One is the duration, and the American Academy of Sleep Medicine suggests that adults should get at least 7 hours of sleep per 24 hours every day to prevent long-term negative health consequences and to maintain high levels of cognitive performance. But there's another component, that is the sleep being undisturbed. That is, we need continuous bouts of sleep for sleep to be recuperative. And obviously, noise is a very potent disruptor of sleep because the auditory system is monitoring our environment 24/7. That is, even while we're sleeping, it's not only looking for sound levels, but also for the content, analyzing that content, and then there's a decision made whether we are woken up or aroused by a noise event or not. Okay, I know that the next study is about the World Health Organization. They published a report in 2011 on the the burden of disease of environmental noise exposure, and looking at a number of different health outcomes. There it is. And I mean, this is like more than 10 years old, and this pie chart would look very different today, especially the ischemic heart disease number would be much bigger. But you can see that sleep disturbance is a major contributor to the overall burden of disease. You can see that in the European member states alone, annually 1.6 million healthy life years are lost due to environmental noise exposure. And again, the nighttime is a very sensitive period where we try to sleep and try to recuperate. So this is something that a lot of the complaints are generated during this period. So in conclusion, undisturbed sleep of sufficient duration is of paramount importance for health and well-being. And there are different scientific methods that can be used to investigate noise effects on sleep, all with their pros and cons. And as I mentioned, in the end, we kind of need all of them to paint the full picture. Traffic noise can disturb and fragment sleep, impair recuperation, and is likely a key contributor to long-term negative health consequences. And I didn't show what the evidence is for that, because I know that Thomas Münzel will do that in his talk. And we do need current and precise exposure response functions representative of the affected population to inform noise policy in general and limit values more specifically.
Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me to give a presentation about noise and cardiovascular disease. I'm a cardiologist and also vascular biologist, so we can do the association between noise and disease. And I want to talk to you now, how does noise damage the vasculature in the brain? The question is also, when we have repeated noise, do we get used to it, or maybe get we a super sensitivity to vascular damage? What does it mean, noise annoyance, and does it has an impact on subsequent cardiovascular disease? And also, Matthias has mentioned it, nighttime noise and cardiovascular and cerebral damage, are they linked together? And what is the link between the annoyance reactions, mainly in the night, and subsequent cardiovascular disease? So the WHO and European Environment Agency, you have seen also some of the numbers already from Matthias. So in western part of Europe, 1.6 million healthy life years are lost every year from traffic-related noise. Nearly 130 million Europeans in towns and cities are exposed to noise levels in excess of 55 decibels, which means at a level where health side effects have to be expected. The European Environment Agency is saying that we have 900,000 cases of hypertension, 40,000 hospital admissions, 6.5 million people suffer from high sleep disturbance, which is very important because sleep disturbance is now acknowledged as an important cardiovascular risk factor. And we have this high number of group with 22 million people suffer from chronic high annoyance. Now, how is noise getting translated to cardiovascular disease? I'd like to introduce to you a paper published by Matthias Barsner and Wolfgang Babisch from the Umweltbundesamt in the European Heart Journal. And Wolfgang Babisch always had the philosophy that we have two pathways of noise damage. The direct one, which means we have very high noise levels, more than 100 decibel, for example, it damaging the ear organ directly, or we have the indirect pathway, which means we have levels between 50 and 60 decibels, which reflects the communication And this causes disturbance of activity, sleep, and communication, and we develop the annoyance reaction. So we are getting angry, which means these are reflecting cognitive and emotional responses. And this, of course, means we have stress, and we can measure that. So we see a sympathetic nerve activation. We can also measure sometimes an increase in cortisol levels. And if this is getting chronically, then you develop your own cardiovascular risk factors. So blood pressure goes up, lipids go up, and glucose levels go up. And if you have this for years, you get cardiovascular disease, ischemic heart disease, stroke, heart failure, arrhythmia, arterial hypertension. So I just wanted to show that it was not clear why this noise stress at the end is getting translated into cardiovascular disease. And we know nowadays that aircraft noise may cause hypertension, coronary artery disease, heart failure, and stroke disease. But we also know from new data from Martin Rösli that aircraft noise, in particular nighttime aircraft noise, can trigger acute myocardial infarction. That's a paper published from Apolline Saucy, European Heart Journal, and they actually established that exposure to noise levels higher than 55 decibel preceding death were significantly associated with mortality for all causes of cardiovascular disease. So when you have in the night, even Zurich Airport is not allowed to fly in the night. They have, of course, they have their exceptions, and then they realized when they have a flight in the night that 2 hours later, then this sudden cardiac event occurred, and they speculate that because of noise and an awakening reaction, stress reaction, you get an increase in stress hormone levels, you get an increase in heart rate and blood pressure, and this at the end may trigger acute cardiovascular death. And this is a very important point, that noise is not just causing cardiovascular disease, it's very strong in causing mental disease. So here noise annoyance was associated with depression and anxiety, generalized anxiety. So when you have extreme annoyance development, the likelihood to get depression or generalized anxiety was at least twofold increased. So the pathophysiology is more complex now, but we know for sure that aircraft noise stimulates, activates the brain. The amygdala is very important. We get signs for inflammation in the vasculature. We also know that the inflammatory cells are getting activated, and we see that vascular function is completely disturbed, which is actually mainly responsible for that the process of calcification of the vessel is getting initiated. So of course, we just said that the sleep disturbance is a risk factor. So we're very interested whether nighttime aircraft noise is more damaging than daytime noise. It was very disturbing to me, the adverse effects on the brain. So when we have 4 nights of nighttime noise, just four nights aircraft noise, then we see that in the brain, a very important enzyme, nitric oxide synthase, the neuronal nitric oxide synthase, is getting downregulated. And this enzyme is responsible for cognitive function, memory, and learning. So, and this explains why that children who respond with increased annoyance have also a decline in cognitive function. So this is very disturbing that we see this very profound changes in the brain already after 4 days and 4 nights of continuous noise. So in summary, I think there's no doubt anymore that noise causes cardiovascular and cerebral damage. Noise increases blood pressure and increases stress hormone release. Repeated noise events prime the vasculature for developing vascular damage. We don't see tolerance to damage development, so we see rather the opposite, that the vessels are getting more sensitive to damage. And cardiovascular damage, we just see it in response to nighttime noise. So the night has to be protected, and aircraft noise should be completely forbidden in the night, and aircrafts shouldn't start in the night. Thank you very much for your attention.
So lastly, I'm going to introduce Peter Bingham. Dr. Bingham is the Chief of Pediatric Neurology at University of Vermont Medical Center in Burlington. And his concern over the neurological and cardiovascular impacts of military aviation noise on children prompted him to write an impassioned letter to Vermont's governor and senators to address the problem.
Sure, thank you. So as a pediatric neurologist up in Burlington and formerly in Philadelphia, I am asked to do what I think is often expected in a medical visit, is draw things down to one cause. And I think this is a medical model that many of you are familiar with. And I am glad to kind of come into this more complex systems world of public health, where things don't have just one answer. As has been mentioned, there are many people and children under these flight paths, and that there's abundant evidence from both animal models and, as has been discussed, epidemiological evidence about impact on children's behavior, cognition, mood, and self-control, self-regulation. I think that we need to introduce a terminology here to drive the point home that sound of a certain quality, not all noise, I think we're qualifying noise, and we're still learning to do that in different ways beyond just decibels, but that we're talking about a neurotoxic. So there are three things that I want to kind of bring home here in terms of what is the neurologist's way to frame, say, an education conducted with families, with children, with adolescents. The three kind of models of the effects that have been discussed so far. And one is, it's not concussion, but it's very closely related to concussion in all of the different neuropsychological ways that noise effects have been measured. They overlap in many ways with what happens with concussion. And then we've talked a little bit about the sympathetic fight or flight response, not literally represented here in representations of EEG, of brain waves. Studies showing that different doses, different levels in decibels of noise alter the brain waves in a way that is undoubtedly aligned with, say, amygdala activation, as Thomas mentioned, and a fight or flight response. This is about learning hormones and trauma. There's a lot of discussion about PTSD and as a unfortunate learning sequence. And so one aspect of the effect on cognition, attention, mood regulation has to do with a terrible learning effect that noise has, loud noise, on our brains and our behavior. And the third thing that I want to bring up is just the most basic nutrient in the garden that we have, that we would tend in supporting children's neurodevelopment, and that is attachment, bonding. Not to mention the situation where the parent may have experience, as many new Americans, immigrants in the Burlington area do have, coming to us for refuge from combat areas and the associations that they have with military aircraft flying overhead. What effect does that have on a repeated basis on parent-child, parent-infant bonding? Something that we could only imagine just beginning to discover and to measure.
I am going to hand over the microphone to our moderator, Nina Berman, who is a professor of journalism at Columbia Journalism School and will be guiding the panel through this.
Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here today. I came to this panel as a result of research into the effect of military aircraft training on civilian populations in Burlington, Vermont, with the F-35s, and in the Northwest Puget Sound area with the Navy Growler planes. But as you all know, military impacts are just one small piece of the bigger picture, which is a national skyscape that has become a threat to human health. We will hear stories from residents and communities all across the US who are living amid harmful environments as a result of aviation noise and pollution. Our panel is representative of millions of people who feel trapped, besieged, terrorized, sacrificed, and fundamentally unheard and uncared for. People in the neighborhoods with low socioeconomic status and majority Black and Brown residents bear the heaviest burden. This is a national health crisis too often reframed as a nuisance, where the onus of mitigation is placed on the victims themselves. This is not a solution. Our regulations are supposed to protect us, but they clearly are not. And the science around noise pollution increasingly points to not just auditory impacts, but severe cardiovascular and metabolic diseases, along with cognitive impairment, as we have just heard. To create safer and healthier communities, those experiencing these impacts need to be fully seen and heard, hence our panel. While their talks will be short due to time constraints, realize that these testimonies speak to years of grief, frustration, and pain, and in some cases, people having to flee their homes in search of quiet. We'll hear from those who feel as though their own military treats them as the enemy. We'll hear from those whose lives have been upended so that pleasure seekers can use the airspace like personal playgrounds. We will hear from those in big cities whose backyards feel like an extension of airport runways. Each story is unique, yet there are clear commonalities, which is why solutions must involve all stakeholders. Thank you for listening closely and compassionately to these stories. We will start off first with Melissa Elstein from Stop the Chop in the New York, New Jersey area.
So I'm with Stop the Chop NYNJ, and we're a nonprofit, all volunteer run organization. I'm personally based in New York City, but we have members throughout the New York metropolitan area. The situation in New York City and that goes towards New Jersey and Long Island, the Hamptons, is that we have two primary causes of helicopter noise and pollution. The commuter charters, and they leave from all three heliports on Manhattan. And these heliports, by the way, are all south of 40th Street. And if you know Manhattan, it's a very narrow island. So that alone is quite absurd. We also have the problem of sightseeing tourist helicopters. We have 30,000 that are allowed currently from the downtown heliport near the seaport, 30,000 annually. They go up and down the harbor, the Hudson River and around the harbor. And we also have sightseeing helicopters that are from Kearney, New Jersey, Linden, New Jersey, and some from Westchester. Those are not limited in where they can go. So they go over Central Park, the Brooklyn Bridge, Empire State Building often, World Trade Center, all of our historic landmarks are now at jeopardy from these low-flying helicopters. The irony of being in the New York City area is the helicopters are mandated to fly below 2,000 feet so they don't interfere with all of our international and national traffic from the three major airports. So I have someone responded by saying, New York City is invaded by helicopters. This is an assault by noise and pollution. It's not livable. It's extremely stressful. The vibrations and the noise causes a visceral queasiness. These helicopters emit a low subsonic frequency that nothing can block. It makes the buildings vibrate. They're bludgeoning us. It's an overbearing racket. Constant noise all day, rumbling and drone every 3 to 5 minutes, causing stress and anxiety, a direct assault, all day long assault. You start noticing the words and it is an attack. We all feel like we're under attack. So you're seeing and hearing that, this extreme noise and vibrations are creating a sensation of an attack. And helicopters were created for the military, for emergency. For those of us who lived through 9/11, and I where I'm sitting right now, my apartment, I did live through 9/11, and it does trigger PTSD, especially because of the nature of these vehicles. And they were never supposed to be designed for sightseeing over residential neighborhoods. So,
hi everyone, my name is Kimberly Gibbs. So in 2011, I founded Citizens for Quiet Skies in Boulder County, Colorado, to address concerns about excessive noise from a skydiving operation company. The skydiving fleet of twin turboprop aircraft would fly repeated loops at full power to reach jump altitude, blanketing our community with abusive, low-frequency noise for 12 plus hours a day. After exhausting all other options, in 2014, we sued Mile High Skydiving and lost. The court awarded judgments against us, the plaintiffs, exceeding $120,000. The Colorado court sent a clear message that there would be no legal remedy for citizens. Today, unrestrained airport expansion and flight training have further increased the noise burden in the community. Over the years, I have met with citizens across the US who describe their experience with repetitive and noisy flights from general aviation airports. They include flight training, skydiving, sightseeing, glider towing, flight clubs, air taxis, helicopters, cargo operations, charter jets, and large military aircraft. They describe sacrifice zones where repetitive flights are exported to neighborhoods many miles away from the airport, where citizens have no representation. Many advocates, including myself, have been subjected to intense targeted aviation harassment. And finally, they report similar health effects: intense frustration, feeling powerless, anger, rage, intense anxiety, and tension within the home environment. So today, I continue to advocate for quiet skies because I truly value environmental quality. It is foundational to the well-being of communities. Thank you, everyone.
My name is Tracy Williams. Aircraft noise has negatively changed life for me and my family. We live in a rural, underserved community in eastern central Alabama with a population between 900 and 1,000 people, mainly people of color. Our community and adjoining ones are subjected to constant noise from different types of aircraft from different airports. We constantly hear various small engine planes, including those from a flight school conducting various training exercises day and night, and from commercial and private jets, cargo planes, military aircraft, helicopters, and more, all flying over and near our area. We're exposed to at least 100 to 150 flights per day, averaging more than 1,000 per week, 6 a.m. to midnight from different types of aircraft, midnight to 6 a.m. from commercial jets and helicopters. The aircraft noise is loud, constant, and repetitive, penetrating through our walls and windows. There's a roaring and rumbling, whirling and high-pitched whining, vibrating and droning, all varying in extremity. My husband and I have experienced chronic stress, anxiety, depression, and sleep interruptions. My health has been seriously affected. I have high blood pressure, panic attacks, ear ringing, and respiratory and breathing difficulties. The repetitive noise has affected our child's learning at home, causing her to exert greater energy to read, focus, and concentrate. She becomes more stressed and more irritable. The intrusions are frequent and have left us feeling hopeless, helpless, unable to enjoy our home and property, and fearful of further harassment and retaliation in response to our efforts to raise awareness and seek help. Despite our 6 years of flight recordings, numerous letters and phone calls to federal representatives, airports, regional FAA offices, and others, our calls for help have gone unheeded. Instead, to my horror, authorities have redirected more flights over our communities as we stand powerless, daring to seek accountability and resolution. Thank you, and thank you, Tracy.
Hi, I'm Chris Hurley, and I'm a founding member and a volunteer with the Sound Defense Alliance on Whidbey Island in Northwest Washington, north of Seattle. The Naval Air Station Whidbey Island is home of the Growler jets, which block communication using electronic weaponry. The Navy uses Whidbey for takeoff and landing training and conducts warfare practice over the Olympic National Park. Ironically, the home of the quietest place in the US. Continental US. Approximately 60,000 people live in the 60,000 people in the greater Puget Sound area are affected by the noise. In central Whidbey, where the Navy uses a small World War II runway, noise has been measured in excess of 120 decibels under the flight path. This map shows the region where we live and the noise zone of the Growlers. On Whidbey, the Growlers conduct 30,000 touch and go operations each year in low altitude flight paths, flying over homes, schools, and hospitals. Growlers also fly 2,300 operations over the Olympic National Park. The impact on humans and wildlife is significant and negative, but the Navy thunders on and wants to expand its presence, bring more jets and more flights. Here are some recent quotes from our community complaint line that covers our entire noise region. So here we go. This is government authorized domestic terrorism. The noise is reverberating through my house and my body like being at a rock concert. I put my rangefinder on one of them. They're flying at 450 feet directly above my house. My 6-month-old can't take naps. This is my worst experience in a campground ever. From morning to night, the jets have been relentless. 8 hours of near constant screaming, roaring, blasting, and shaking. That amount of noise in a residential area is pure torture. And lastly, my grandchildren burst into tears.
I'm Shelley Kincaid. I'm a 40-year veteran in education as a teacher and as an administrator. I live on the edge of Olympic National Park in Forks. Olympic National Park has been designated officially as a quiet park, no longer. With the 2016 onset of growler flights over our town and Olympic National Park, I joined numerous state and national organizations to advocate for quiet skies. Flights over our part of the region start mid-morning because it takes the flights from Whidbey to get over to us and continue past 11 o'clock at night. The inescapable noise of the growlers, especially in our area when they are firing their afterburners as part of their electronic warfare exercises, can be heard and felt over the crashing waves at the beach and above forestry operations. Hearing nature and experiencing peaceful tranquility have become exceedingly rare. Teachers report greater agitation in the classroom when growlers fly and the frustration of having to stop instruction for the jets to pass. More than one child has asked recently if we are at war with Russia, as is Ukraine. Children on the playground cannot hear their supervisors. Parents are reporting their children exhibit greater irritability at home and increased flares of temper tantruming. Young children on the autism spectrum or with past trauma and mental health issues have run to hide to try to escape the sound, rumble, and vibrations they feel in their little bodies. Residents report heightened stress, higher blood pressure, rage, resentment, powerless frustration, alienation, and withdrawal. Concern over the growler jet noise has also torn apart our small community. Tourists expecting a quiet national park experience complain at motels and at the visitor center. Local citizens who speak up on behalf of quiet skies are targeted by those supporting the sounds of freedom, dividing our very small community, causing more stress and pressure on friendships and social gatherings. Hear us. Thank you.
Now we're going to hear more about commercial aircraft, starting with Ann Hollander.
My name is Ann Hollander. I am a founder and leader of the Montgomery County Quiet Skies Coalition of Maryland. Montgomery County borders the District of Columbia and experienced negligible noise from airplane traffic until 7 years ago. In 2015, the FAA, without warning, moved the flight paths for all commercial aircraft arriving and departing Washington Reagan National Airport to new paths that take them directly over approximately 7,500 homes, 20,000 residents, and numerous K-12 schools in our county. It then concentrated those flights into narrow rails. Our communities are now subjected to noise from over 400 low altitude commercial aircraft every day, over 146,000 commercial aircraft per year. Residents describe feeling anxious, agitated, angry, assaulted, bombarded, frustrated, worried, irritable, distracted, and stressed. The fact that they had no say whatsoever in this intrusion makes them feel unjustly harassed, oppressed, undervalued, exploited, enraged, and powerless. Several described it as criminal. The noise begins at 5:30 a.m. every day and extends well past midnight every night, leaving people sleep deprived, fatigued, uncentered, depressed, and exhausted. One person mentioned being afraid that she would be fired from her job because she is so sleep deprived. Another reported that he saved for 30 years to buy a house in his community, but now cannot sleep in his own bed. The fact that there is no way to escape or avoid the noise leaves people feeling defeated, deprived, helpless, and trapped. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Becci, and I have lived for over 40 years in a century-old community between LaGuardia and JFK airports in Queens, New York. Before 2012, we were accustomed to commercial aircraft flying at higher altitudes above our community. Suddenly, the FAA changed flight procedures at LaGuardia to deconflict airspace between the two airports, promising no noise impact to residential communities. In fact, Queens residents were blasted out of bed at 6 a.m. The noise was so intense that my initial thought was another terrorist attack in New York City. The flight procedure changes resulted in the complete destruction of everyday life with low altitude flights several minutes apart for up to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. These changes were so terrible and intolerable that Governor Andrew Cuomo created the New York Community Aviation Roundtable. For me, my family, and my community, this has caused enormous stress and countless hours filing noise complaints, educating ourselves about airport operations, community meetings with elected officials, and a feeling of helplessness beyond our control. I refuse to sleep at night while filing noise complaints late into the early morning hours, only to have several hours of quiet before the plane started again. The soundscape of our historic community changed overnight, from that of birdsong to the repeated sound of distant thunder building to a crescendo of screaming jet engines over our home. I have been working ever since to regain our quality of life. Some comments from my community describing anger, despondency, cognitive malfunction, and fear. The low flying and constant repetition of aircraft is an all-out assault on one's senses. I am desperate to take a nap after chemotherapy. I should be able to rest in my own home. We never know when the planes will start. It's really awful living in fear. How can they just take away our peaceful life? A minor disagreement easily escalates to a screaming match. The abusive noise is so terrible. Many have no memory of quietness.
Yes, I'm Barbara Brown, chairperson of the Eastern Queens Alliance and also the JFK Airport Committee. The communities in Southeast Queens, north of JFK Airport, are bombarded by jet noise day and night from takeoffs and landings. The noise is unrelenting. Low-flying planes crisscross our neighborhoods, roaring overhead every minute. There is always a low rumble or din heard from idling planes on the airport. This is not only a quality of life issue, but a health issue and an environmental justice issue as well for our majority Black community. In addition to the noise, we are equally concerned about aviation-related air pollution, We believe that comprehensive independent studies of noise, air pollution, and possible related health effects within 5 to 10 miles from JFK Airport need to be conducted.
I'm Elaine Miller, co-founder of Plain Sense for Long Island. We work with communities outside the 65 DNL in Nassau County that have been undergoing devastating effects from next-gen flight paths, some of which allow jets to fly at dangerously low altitudes over our homes. I will read 3 stories from members of our organization. As you will hear, the peace, sanctity of our homes and the health of our children and families are at stake. Stacy Vargas, 10 miles from JFK. Me, my husband, children, and dog are being impacted physically, emotionally, and psychologically from round-the-clock plane landings. Noise, fuel smells, and filthy air surround our home. The house shudders when a plane is at 1,900 feet. The dog shakes. My husband tries to tune out, but the constant noise sets him on edge. My children are anxious when the 22L runway goes live at night. Without effective noise mitigation, nobody sleeps, diminishing our children's school performance. I fear for our lives and the ability to live free from harmful noise and pollution. Anne Marie Cerrone, 20 miles from JFK. 3 years ago, I purchased my dream home. My backyard was going to be my sanctuary, but now I feel on the edge of a nervous breakdown. I work from home and can't concentrate with the constant roar of planes every 30 seconds at 1,500 feet. I can't sit in my backyard. I smell jet fuel. I worry about the carcinogens my children are breathing. I am distraught that my home is now worthless. I have a constant headache because there is no reprieve for days on end. Sometimes 3 planes fly at once over our house, causing me to shut the windows and crawl into bed, depressed and searching for a new home where I could hear the birds. Patricia Ziegler, 5 miles from JFK. Since NextGen, my family has been tortured by low-flying planes every 60 to 90 seconds directly over our house. Previously, planes flew higher and flights were dispersed, no problem. Now our homes are nearly unlivable. Nothing drowns out the noise, even the heaviest duty earplugs. We are awakened at 1 a.m., hearts racing by low-flying cargo planes and whining Airbuses. It's like living in a war zone, to say nothing of the exhaust pollution, which is slowly poisoning us. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for listening to our members of our community.
Hello, I am Matt Santoro. I'm a high school student. I live in Bayside, New York, which is about 10 miles away from LaGuardia Airport. Planes depart from LaGuardia often. A lot of the time, they actually depart at the worst times possible. This affects me in a number of ways. When I'm about to fall asleep, if I hear a plane flying over, with roaring engines, I feel angry because I know I won't be able to fall asleep for the next half hour, which I believe affects my sleep rhythm. I also believe this can affect me in school the next day. When I come home and I'm working on my personal computer projects and I'm brainstorming issues, the planes flying above cause me to lose my thoughts, and this ruins the progress of the projects I'm working on. This makes me feel very upset and angry. The overhead plane noises cause me to feel very upset and get angry too many times.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I'm going to just quickly sort of summarize some of the things that I think we're all hearing. I'm sure these stories are familiar to many in the audience. Some commonalities is that people are feeling powerless, that their elected officials do not care, or do not listen, or are offering them no solutions. Certain industries are prioritized over others, that our places for peace, leisure, and restoration, our parks and our forests have been compromised. We feel we are under attack as though we are living in a constant war zone. And perhaps in some ways, maybe the worst of all this is that activists who are doing heroic work here are often targeted, harassed, called awful names, stalked, and are seen as the problem. And of course, people are getting sick. They're afraid they will be sick. They're afraid for their children and their homes, which for many are their life investments, have become worthless.
I am here to very quickly introduce and get going and get out of the way of our legal panel. consists of, as you see here, and their full bios are available. And so I'm going to just turn it over to them as quickly as possible. Should people hoping to protect the public from aviation noise be looking for help in the form of federal legislation or petitions for federal rulemaking?
In any kind of standalone act or legislation is probably not going to be looked on with any favor by Congress.
We have to look at litigation and legislation, I think, as a package. If you sit on a chair and someone plants a bomb, but the noise is averaged over 24 hours, there is no noise. The FAA has shown no willingness. That's where legislation comes in.
We used to be able to have folks on both the Republican and the Democratic side work together and come to compromises in doing different types of things. That we all are entitled to certain public health. We're entitled to drink clean water. We're entitled to breathe clean air. We're entitled to not have such a noisy environment that we can't sleep.
If I may, Todd, just jump back in here. One of the things that in order to be more specific with the legislation is you have to have something that is very, very specific. For example, standards, noise standards that apply to across the nation, enforceable noise standards.
So we can't go in there and complain. We have to go in there and give them the bill we want passed.
And the issue here is when we're talking aircraft noise, there's different targets in terms of solutions, practical solutions. When you're talking about commercial helicopters flying over Manhattan versus tourist helicopters flying over Manhattan versus commercial aircraft versus military aircraft, the political solution and the solutions in terms of litigation and what authority you're going to be suing on are going to be different. I think the answer is going to be in terms of litigation is very similar to legislation. What you need is specific. You're not likely, I don't believe, to get groundswell legislation that's going to change the FAA or that's going to knock out a particular part of legislation that's going to really solve this problem. But you may have local litigation in local courts dealing with local matters that could give some relief.
You don't sue a federal agency for what it has done.
Right.
Badly or not. You sue it for what it has not done.
Correct.
The problem with litigation is that there are very few arrows in our quiver as litigators to go after aircraft noise. Certainly not like with any other of the environmental issues like air or water or toxic substances. Is in order for us to be successful in court, we need laws that we can enforce in court against the FAA to make sure that the FAA takes into account the people on the ground.
What would you put forward as your one best thing that we might discuss or think about as a solution at a later date?
So one of the things that was talked about, earlier in the things is the environmental justice implications. And this administration has an emphasis on environmental justice, and many of the communities, if not most, that are impacted by aircraft noise are also environmental justice communities. In the United States, the #1 predictor of health is zip code, okay, period. The #1 predictor of health in the United States is zip code.
I think the one thing is enforceable noise standards.
We have to expand that average noise metric to a single event noise metric, because that's what causes health problems.
There's no doubt that noise causes cardiovascular and cerebral damage. So I would like to stress that we don't forget that by not correcting the air pollution and noise problems, our country is spending far more than we realize. And the people who are bearing that cost are you and me.
Quiet Communities is dedicated to spurring action that can affect change and protect the lives of Americans and the global community, so that quiet is not just a luxury, but something we can all enjoy daily.